Elizabeth Warren didn't want to be on Fox News. Tulsi Gabbard has no such qualms. In fact, Tulsi Gabbard put out an email essentially saying, pick me. Initially, my wife and I couldn't figure out whether or not this was a situation where she was going to be on Fox News. It's like, okay, when is she going to be on? No. When Elizabeth Warren turned down Fox News because of some kind of ethical considerations, poor choice, but whatever, Tulsi Gabbard says, pick me. This is not the town hall that she wanted, but she appeared on Fox News anyway, having a conversation about essentially provocations towards Iran with Donald Trump. Trump has been taking provocative action. Let's say John Bolton and Donald Trump has been taking provocative action in this notion of trying to either bait or squeeze Iran into submission. Neither of those things are going to happen. And yet, they continue with this strategy. This strategy can't work. I'm going to explain why this strategy can't work. It's a blunt instrument trying to do something that requires a little bit more finesse. But it can't work. It can't work for several reasons. But first, let's hear Tulsi Gabbard talk about this conflict. Because ultimately, what we're seeing is this kind of inexorable, slow walk to war. I understand that people often, when they're talking about this, they talk about this in this context of, well, Donald Trump doesn't really want a war. He just wants to squeeze them. But what does that mean, squeezing them? He's not really squeezing the leaders of the country per se. He's injuring and squeezing the people of that country. This notion that you can create enough chaos in the country where the people rise up and take out the leaders. That's, in some cases, true. But I'm doubtful in this case. Like, this is not a situation where they don't know that the United States is preying on their country. This is not a situation where the CIA is working in secret to undermine that country. They absolutely know that the United States is responsible for the predatory behavior and the sanctions that are being applied. They absolutely know that the rest of the world is on their side on this. And they absolutely know that from the standpoint of moral authority here, we don't have it. The rest of the world is not with us on this. We're taking extraordinarily belligerent behavior. Let's listen to Tulsi. Let's hear her do her thing.
People safe, to put our national security at the forefront. What's concerning to me is that while Trump and others in his administration are saying that they don't want to go to war with Iran, I hear them saying that more now that they're getting a lot of pushback from our allies, like those in the UK, when in fact the actions that the administration has been taking are telling us another story, that it's actually pushing us closer and closer to the prospect of a war with Iran. This is what I'm very concerned about, because I know that that cost on our troops, on the American people, on civilians across the Middle East and the region, creating more refugees, creating more instability in Europe. I mean, the cost would be very great. They have not presented that evidence to Congress yet. So,
and you'll get a briefing next week.
We look forward to getting that information
okay.
and considering it very carefully.
So essentially her point is, look, we haven't received any information on this. And these guys are upping the ante. They read this thing where this lunatic, Marco Rubio, comes out saying, you know, the president is absolutely right because Iran is taking, you know, a certain behavior. This is utter nonsense. I often wonder, who do they make this stuff for? And I assume that they make this stuff for the American audience because the rest of the world doesn't buy it one iota. There was another guy, Cotton, says, oh, 2 strikes. That's all it'll take, 2 strikes. Because he knows. He knows stuff like that. 2 strikes. Tulsi Gabbard is right here, by the way. She's right here. And by the way, this is her safe space. In this interview, she's repeated that line if I'm not mistaken, every time she's spoken in this interview, she's repeated the same line or most of the times, this thing of, I am a soldier, I was deployed multiple times, etc., etc. As a soldier, my experiences have given me the perspective of, etc. That's her safe space. And also, this other argument that is kind of difficult to contest, which is why she says it this way. It costs a lot to wage these wars. Not just money, meaning trillions of dollars, but also in lives, people, human beings that we're sending over there. Your sons, somebody else's kids, that we're sending over there to do what? To do what? Do we really need to send our kids over there to do this particular action? Do we? Tulsi Gabbard is absolutely right. 2 points I really want to make here. Donald Trump has a time limit on his coup attempt. He has a time limit. He's going to be running in an election. If Donald Trump is running in an election and there's an oil shock that sends prices up to $10 a gallon, Donald Trump is going to lose that election. This gets dicey of going into an election season with this loose end hanging. Strategically, that's problematic. That's what I'm saying. But that's one point, meaning he has a time limit on when and how he goes about trying to implement the strategy of getting them back to the negotiation table. The problem with this is they will lose all credibility if they go back to the negotiation table. You've been screaming that this is a bad deal, this is a horrible deal, they've taken advantage of us, etc., etc. The Iranians are doing this, the Iranians are doing that, they're attacking our interests, etc., etc. All with the notion of trying to browbeat, cajole somebody to get back to a negotiation table when you unilaterally pulled out of the deal. Politically, it is impossible for them to go back to that deal. They couldn't do it if they wanted to. Think about it from the standpoint of the United States. Say for the moment the United States was in a deal with multi-nations. And say for the moment that one of the other nations pulled out. Say Iran pulled out. And Iran said, I don't like the deal that we got. And every other nation stood with the United States and says, yeah, kick rocks. You signed on to the deal. You're stuck with the deal. Is there any condition that the United States will negotiate? No, there wouldn't be. The rest of the world would stand in unison and say, kick rocks. The only difference here is the power disparity between the two nations. There's not a moral authority here. Power authority. There's a difference in those things. So, that first point is there are hardliners in Iran that will create political turmoil if this government is so weak that it goes back to the negotiation table. It's not a choice that it gets. They're politically compelled into action. It's like there's a chemical weapon strike in Syria. Is Donald Trump going to quibble about it? No, he's just going to fire a missile. He's going to fire a missile because the political winds push him to do such a thing. Now, he could do something different, but politically, the push is for him to fire the missile. I'm saying the same thing is true in their politics. It's politically radioactive. That's the first point. You've put him in a corner. Can't go back to the deal. The second point, nationalistic fervor. Back in the 50s, when the CIA used to topple governments, they used to do it in the shadows. A government tumbles, and there's a white guy somewhere that says, those darkists can't keep their governments together to save their life. Missing the point that the CIA was entirely destabilizing those governments. That's not what's happening today. This is happening in the open. The United States is preying on a country using sanctions in order to entirely destabilize that country. That's astonishing. The rest of the world looks at this and says, this is horrific. We completely disagree. And yet they're entirely feckless and neutered, without testicles, in this process. Even when all of those countries of the world balked at what the United States was doing, it couldn't do anything about it. That's amazing. The problem with that is it spurs countries to find ways to do stuff about it. At this point, no, they can't. But you've created a bad taste in those countries' mouth that don't want to be bullied by the United States. And at first opportunity, they're going to find ways to prevent themselves from being bullied in this way. You've weakened your power by using your power in this measure. You will create a nationalistic fervor in that country. Even if they're against the government, not particularly liking the government, they are going to immensely hate you. Between you and the government, they're going to choose the government. Just saying. Everybody knows that you are preying on that government. countries tend to get more nationalistic when there's some kind of foreign invader at their doorstep, and you are literally a foreign invader at their doorstep. And the last point, Europe is entirely against you. There's no situation in which Europe is going to be with you on this particular issue. With Iraq, Europe lazily went into this notion of letting the United States do what it wanted. And you ended up with refugees flooding Europe. As those refugees flooded Europe, Europe became destabilized. Now, whatever problems Europe had, the problems was magnified when all of those migrants started coming to the shores. Angela Merkel has no idea what to do with the migrants. She lets a lot of them in Germany, destabilizes the German government. She loses her position. She was in that position for like 20 years. Position, destabilized. And don't quote me on the 20, but she's in that position forever. Her position was almost like eternal of sorts.
Offensive operations. We know.
Destabilizes Germany. Italy, destabilized. You get Eurosceptic parties. Eurosceptic parties making hay of this issue of the migrants coming into their countries, coming across on their shores. There were certain European countries that were facing the coast, so they would get those migrants more so than other countries, like Greece, for example. Greece, one of the countries least capable of dealing with the issue, would have to deal with the issue, whereas another country that was inland didn't necessarily have to deal with that issue. Thus created a crisis in Europe. But understand where this came from. This was a foreign policy issue. Europe went along with the United States smashing the shit out of Iraq. There were consequences. Iraq 2.0. Iran. Do you honestly believe that Europe is going to be with you on that? Those governments at that point is probably somewhat pissed at the United States for the bullying in and of itself. But in this very specific instance, they've experienced this already. And this has had negative consequences on their various governments and in Europe itself. When that British general contradicted the intelligence that the United States was putting out. Why do you think he did that? He did that because there were hundreds of Brits that died in that Iraq war. And not just died in that Iraq war, they had latched on to a war that the United States started out of just being an ally. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And based from Britain's standpoint, the United States knew there weren't weapons of mass destruction, meaning those people died for nothing. We might have forgotten that in this country. I swear to God, they didn't forget it in Britain. I swear to God, they didn't forget it in Britain. And they didn't forget it in the rest of Europe, where all of those migrants came flooding into the city. We are utterly and entirely alone. Alone. We have no allies on this issue. This is bound to fail, because that's my point. And it's not just this one is bound to fail. All of these efforts are bound to fail. These are like right-wing nonsense. It's like you give the right wing a playpen. This is comically childish in regards to the way they're going about trying to destroy these countries. But there are real-world consequences that real human beings are being injured in the means that Trump, Bolton, Pompeo, Abrams are going about their affairs. And whatever Trump wants, again, is secondary to the real world phenomena. Meaning, if Bolton crafts some position where something is attacked and they blame it on Iran, all processes kick off. Because all processes have already been built up. Meaning, over the course of this time period where they're ratcheting this up with this notion of threats to get to the table, the moment something takes place, all of those processes kick off. Doesn't matter what Trump wants at that point. He's embarked into a war. Tulsi Gabbard is right. This is dramatically worrying and disconcerting. So I'm going to put this video at the bottom. This video is more tamed. She didn't necessarily go after Tulsi Gabbard in this video. And she gets into questions about women's voting and everything else. But she's gently trying to push Trump in an odd way. But Tulsi Gabbard is kind of pushing back on this notion that what Trump is doing here is right. Just saying, look, we don't have any information on this. And these guys are ratcheting up tensions to the point of potential war. So I'll leave this here. And let's see, there was a super chat. Executive Chess Guide. This is Republican playbook. Start war 2 years in and make re-election argument. You can't change leaders during the war, and certainly not to weak Democrats. But see, the problem with this is, I don't think Trump got elected with this notion of no war. That's his brand. Like, this is not George Bush getting involved in a war. This is Donald Trump destroying his brand by getting involved in another conflict in the Middle East. And in this case, this is not the first time nonsense. This is not after being attacked by 9/11. This is a premeditated war that the rest of the world completely abdicates. We have nothing to do with this. And we don't even know if they stand aside on this. That's the wild part. We have no idea what China and Russia does if the United States tries to attack Iran. No idea. This is, I understand what you're saying, Zuggy, but this is a little different. So I'm going to end this one. Bold like a leopard. Jamal, did you see my comment on your last video about the Daily Beast being owned by IAC? Owned by Clintonista Barry Diller with Chelsea Clinton on the board. I remember that. Chelsea Clinton is on the board. You're right. I mean, but that makes their argument that much more absurd. Like, the Daily Beast, I don't understand how, that makes no sense to me. How do you make this argument that Tulsi Gabbard is somehow getting money from the Russians or people who are friendly with Russia, which in and of itself gets a little dicey. I mean, that's somewhat xenophobic in general. But you're using that just to tar her. There's no there in the article. But with a straight face, you guys are perfectly okay with Clinton and the money she took from Saudi Arabia. I mean, come on. These guys are out there beheading people. What the fuck? It's just astonishing that they say this stuff with a straight face. Balthazar, he still has a brand. I thought he destroyed it with Trump steaks, Trump vodka, Trump casinos. Yes, Balthazar, but this brand is slightly different. And I think Trump cares about this brand. I honestly think he does. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I honestly think he does. When he's in those interviews and he's like, I kept us out of wars. I don't think Trump considers sanctions wars. Like, I think in his mind, we don't have any large-scale conflicts. The last two presidents invaded countries and destroyed countries. I haven't done that. Yes, I'm entering a severe degree of brinksmanship with Iran, but I haven't broken it. Yeah. That's his, look, his point, his brand is that he doesn't like wars. Like, even in the arguments that take place in the Washington Post, like newspapers that hate his guts, like, they own up to these kind of backroom arguments where he's going after Biden because he believed Biden was being too hard, ratcheting up. You're going to get me in a war. Think of it as if you delegated responsibility for something. You said, look, you're my Venezuela guy. You're my Iran guy. I need you to get them back to the negotiation table. And Biden says, okay, I'll work up a plan for that. And Biden says, my plan is to ratchet up tension so much that it gets to a fever pitch. Essentially, the bullying class threatening, I'm going to punch you in the nose after lunch. I'm going to punch you in the nose. You better sit here with me into negotiations. So punch in the fucking nose. And you do that over and over and over and over again. And then the other people around look around and be like, that guy looks fucking insane. I mean, he's threatening, like he's belligerent. What the fuck's wrong with him? But that's what John Bolton's plan is. I'm going to punch you in the nose after lunch if you don't sit with me. Donald Trump says, I like that plan. Go for it. Don't get me in no wars. The problem is John Bolton wants to get into a war. John Bolton is an old man. He's going to die soon. What does he care? John Bolton wants to get into a war. John Bolton also knows that there are certain things that would force the president's hand. And that's the most terrifying aspect of this. All right, I'm going to end this one because I have another one that I want to do. If you guys enjoy the content, please consider sharing, liking, subscribing, and you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And even $1 helps, because I strongly suspect this video is going to get demonetized. Thanks all.